Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our new OPA Live panel. And today is a special panel. We're going to speak about the US elections. But this is not just about finding out what the results may be, but we use this as a learning experience so that we can test predictive techniques. And each of the presenters will demonstrate a different approach to the analysis. So I'm delighted to be with my colleagues here, Oner from Turkey. I'm going to have more elaborate introductions as we start with everyone. But now briefly, introducing everyone. So Oner is from Turkey. He's an expert in predictive techniques. He's doing a lot of work locally and internationally, and has, predicted. He's on television all the time, as far as I can see, because he's well renowned for his approach to this kind of events. So we welcome Oner. And Deborah Houlding from the UK. Welcome as well. We're privileged to have Deborah, who is a namesake in our field, and it's the first time Deborah is presenting for OPA, so we're really looking forward to this. Ken will be a little late. He had an emergency and will join us in about 15 to 20 minutes. So hello, Ken, wherever you are. Ken will present the Vedic perspective, Vedic Indian, and he's from San Diego. So I'll again introduce him more elaborately as his turn comes. And then Maurice Fernandez. Most of you know me from presenting and moderating OPA events. So here we are again. And as you know, the way this exercise works is that we're having the live event today. Each speaker is going to have about 20 minutes. And they also have submitted an article that will be published in our magazine, The Career Astrologer, which is scheduled to be released on the equinox, which is about 2 days from now. So you'll be able to read about all these analysis and see the charts and, get a deeper angle on everything. So those of you who are OPA members will have access to all the recording of this event, the magazine, and so forth. Those who are not OPA members will not have access to all the articles, just part of them. But if you're registered, even as a non-member, you'll also have access to this. So before we dive into our subject, I just want to introduce also our next event. OPA is going to have a virtual conference next April 2021. So it's the end of April. And some of you are familiar with our tracks. So we have several short presentations, 1 hour presentation on different topics, but then we also have a 3-day track for a few hours. So it's going to be 3 hours to 4 hours a day with a track leader, and you have to choose one track, one of these 14 tracks. We're still in process of possibly adding tracks, adding lectures. So it's a really varied selection of topics, from Jyotish, traditional astrology, modern astrology, you'll recognize many of the speakers, and we're looking forward to a really spectacular event. So the sales is not on yet. You'll be able to register probably by the end of the month, early October. But this is just a preview into what's coming up for OPA. And here we are. Here are our candidates and our US election. So one of the things I would like to highlight before we get into each, with every presenter, is to understand what are the factors that we're using and what are the parameters of this exercise. So astrology, is a wonderful, powerful tool. We have this privilege to have insight into cycles, and as a result, to understand what is coming up. As you may know, precise predictions are not always something that we should rely on. So each of the presenter here is going to use a specific technique, and only that technique, maybe two combined technique, as Oner will use both perfection and Firdaria and combine them. I'm going to use transits and solar arcs. Deborah is using the accession chart. And so each one is basically presenting the analysis from a specific angle and see who has the greater odds of getting the recognition and serving as a president of the United States. So there are so many mitigating factors, so many techniques, so many perspectives. And we are, in our craft, blessed with that kind of abundant tools and techniques. But at the same time, it's a challenge to synthesize all this information, especially when you have contradicting information. Some techniques will highlight a certain candidate, other techniques may highlight another candidate. So we'll basically leave it to you to make the final decision. The most important thing is to see how the astrology can work. What are the uses of astrology and what are the limitations of astrology? The great thing about this particular cycle of elections is that we have the birth time of 3 of the candidates, meaning Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris have apparently a confirmed birth time, even though there are different versions for Donald Trump's chart. Still, it's likely reliable information that we can use for predictive techniques, something that we didn't have in previous cycles, and we had to rely on charts without time. The only candidate, the only person here who doesn't have a time of birth is Mike Pence, the vice president candidate for the Republican Party. Another thing I would like to highlight is that we each have our preferences. We're all coming very emotionally engaged with this election. A lot of, the stakes are high. And yet, as astrologers, we want to come as neutral as possible and speak from the astrology, not from our personal preferences, because that wouldn't do any service to our profession. However, is there any way to completely eliminate bias? We'll see. One of the things is that astrology provides a lot of information, but the interpretation is up to the astrologer. And so we are conditioned beings, we are subject to our culture, to our preferences and biases. But I'm glad to have at least two astrologers who are not from the US and may provide, a more objective perspective because they're not possibly as immediately involved as the rest of us. So on this note, let's begin with Oner Doser. So just a moment here, I will have to get out of the screen sharing for a moment. So Oner is an astrology consultant, instructor, researcher, and author based in Istanbul, Turkey, author of 32 books, 14 of them translated into English, Chinese, and Serbian. Oner is the founder of Astrology School of Astrology, which has trained more than 1,700 students. He organizes a yearly international astrology conference called Astrology Days in Turkey since 2012, with renowned speakers from around the world. Oner is professionally certified by Robert Zoller's Medieval Astrology School, as well as ESAR and OPA certified. And he's the OPA satellite for Turkey. So welcome, Oner. And Oner is going to present the analysis using Firdaria and Profection. So tell us all about it.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Maurice. Thank you for this great organization, as always. And it's great pleasure to be here, great honor as well. Tonight, I will be presenting, but I cannot share my screen. Maurice, can you check it? I will try still. So I will be speaking about Firdaria and Profection techniques, which I learned from the great master Robert Zoller, and of course from the books of the ancients, such as Abu Mashar and just a minute. Yeah, here it is. Here I go. Yes, Abu Mashar, Guido Bonatti, and the others, especially from medieval times. First of all, I want to compare two charts to show you the predictive techniques of traditional astrology, such as Firdaria, Profections, and of course transits. Transits were used by the traditional astrologers, but after using the Time Lord systems, such as Firdaria, directing by terms, triplicity rulerships, or Profection technique. So before start to predict something, we should see the prints of that prediction in the chart, in the natal chart. The natal promise is the most important. Whatever the chart promises, it happens to the native. Whatever is not promised in the chart, it does not come true. This is the main principle of medieval astrology, I can say. So I will start comparing two charts with Donald Trump and Joe Biden to see or to show you the strength of the planets placing in those charts. First of all, I want to clear that I'm using Placidus houses, a quadrant house system. Some traditional astrologers are using whole sign houses, which I respect. And at the background, I always check the chart with whole sign house system as well. And I'm using traditional 7 planets and 2 nodes. Additionally, the modern planets, namely generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron as well. I'm using fixed stars, and sometimes I'm using asteroids as well, at least some of them. And I'm using 5-degree rule, which is actually coming from Moreno's time. That is, if a planet, such as Jupiter here, as you see, close to the next house cusp, inside of 5-degree, that planet works for both houses. But what I'm doing here, if a planet close to a house cusp and the next sign is the same what the planet is in, then I'm using that planet, I'm counting that planet in the next house, because the house cusps are the most strengthful places for the planets to be in. So, for example, I count this Jupiter inside of the 3rd house, but on the other side, Venus is placed in the 11th house, very close to the 12th house cusp by 6 degrees, but the sign is changing. We see Leo on the cusp of 12th house, but Venus is placed in Cancer. So I count this Venus in the 11th house. And I give 7-8 degree of orb to Sun and the Moon. For example, the Moon is placed very close to the 5th house cusp with 8 degree, working for the 5th house as well. And the Sun is very close to the 11th house cusp and working for the 11th house as well. Mars is very close to the ascendant in the same sign with the ascendants, Leo. So I count that Mars in the 1st house, which we can see in Donald Trump's attitude and his physical appearance as well. And for the fixed stars, one of the most important fixed stars is Regulus. Actually, it is very close to the ecliptic, and any planet close to that fixed star, it gets more strength. Mars is close to Regulus, and Regulus is also conjunct to Ascendant. This is a very powerful placement because Regulus gives fame, wealth, honor, and success in life. So this is a very strengthful placement for Mars, and since we have Regulus on the Ascendant, it is very powerful. And the ruler of the Ascendant, which is indicating Donald Trump in this chart, symbolically, the Sun, placed in the 10th house close to the 11th, lucky house, and Peregrine, he doesn't have any dignity in this sign, but conjunct 3 important fixed stars, Capella, Pact, and Bellatrix. Bellatrix is the most powerful one, and any planet is in conjunction, that is in conjunction with a beneficial fixed star or powerful fixed star, it is more powerful. The other rule to get more strength for a planet to be in conjunction with the North Node. So Sun North Node conjunction gives the Sun more strength. And another thing, Sun trines to Jupiter. Jupiter also gives a power to the Sun as well, as the ruler of the Ascendant, indicating the native himself. And although the Sun is Peregrine, that he does not have any dignity in the sign, it is highs. Highs mean in a diurnal chart, the Sun as a diurnal planet in a diurnal sign, which is Gemini. And it is a small dignity which gives more power to a planet. Sun is highest. Hence, the Sun is not afflicted by any of the malefics by conjunction, square, or opposition, which is good for the Sun. And the Sun placed in Oriental quadrant, which begins from the Ascendant until to the MC, it gives more strength to the Sun. So we have a very powerful Sun, which gives the native fame, glory, and of course, success. Anyone have more angular planets in his chart, that means he will have more power in the life. So we see Uranus, Sun, they are angular, Mars is angular, the Moon is angular, and 3 planets in benefic 11th house. So most of the planets are placed powerfully in this chart. And additionally, he has Regulus on the Ascendant with Mars, and 3 important fixed stars with the sun. Additionally, he has Mercury with Alhena, which is called by the Arabic astrologers proudly marching one. And of course, we have Venus and Saturn with Procyon, which is a weaker fixed star, not like the others, but it gives also a little bit chance to a native. There are malefic fixed stars as well, such as Algol and Capulus conjunct Donald Trump's MC. Actually, these are very powerful fixed stars, but why we call them malefic? Because Medusa's, cotton head is related with Algol, and it gives bad luck according to some astrologers, most of the astrologers. So it gives a person, especially if it is in conjunction with the MC, it gives a person passion to be more successful, but it has the risk to fall from the grace as well. So let's check Joe Biden's chart. In this chart, beginning from the sun, placing in the 12th house, which is the weakest house of the 12 houses, and there are some other planets. Mars is also very close to the 12th house cusp, and we can count it in the 12th house because Mars in Scorpio, 12th house, cusp is Scorpio, so 4 planets in the 12th, which is very big traditionally. These planets, especially the Sun and Venus, are in conjunction with Agena and Ptolemy. They are important fixed stars. Ptolemy is indicate the lessons of life, what we learn from life. He's a teacher as well. And Mars is in conjunction with Alpeka and Acrux that are important and powerful fixed stars as well. Is the ruler of the ascendant, indicating Joe Biden. Jupiter placed in the 8th house. 8th house is one of the intermediate houses. It gives 50% strength. Actually, in traditional astrology, angular houses give 100% strength. Cadent houses give only 25% strength, but the succeeding houses that are intermediate houses gives 50% strength. Jupiter is in conjunction with Procyon. It's not that powerful fixed star. In trine aspect to the sun, it gives success to the sun, but the sun is peregrine in Scorpio. In the 12th house, it is afflicted. In Oriental quadrant, which is good, but 12th house is still problematic. In conjunction with Venus, which strengthens the sun, and trine aspect to Jupiter, which is good, but still not good like the other chart we have been looking first, namely Donald Trump's chart. He has Saturn angular and Neptune angular, and Uranus is very close to the 7th house cusp. We can count Uranus as well, angular. Saturn is in conjunction with Aldebaran, which is one of the warrior fixed star, a powerful fixed star, but in the 7th house. 7th house is the house of the other parties, so it's not giving strength to the Joe Biden himself, but the other parties, his opponents. So we clearly see that the first chart we have seen is more powerful with the planets, with the fixed stars, and the angularity than the second one. This is one of the most important things before I advance to predictive techniques. Now, tonight I will be speaking about Peudaria. Peudarias are coming from Persian times, from Abu Mashar al-Balhi from the 9th century. Actually, he first used those in mundane astrology, and then it entered to natal astrology. 7 traditional planets are taking place one by one. Actually, these are related with the days of the week. Saturn is related with Saturn's day, and then you go to Sun's day, and then you go up to the Moon's day, and then you go down to Mars, Tuesday and Anglo-Saxon deity, which is similar to Mars. And then you go to Mercury, Bodin's day, another deity, which is similar to Mercury, Bodin. And then Jupiter, Thor's day, which is related with Thursday, Thor, we all know very well. And then we go down to Venus, Phrygia's day, which is Friday's ruler, actually. And then we go up to the Saturn again for Saturday. So this is the Chaldean order, or the order of the planets in speed. And if you have a diurnal chart at hand, you start with the sun. If you have a nocturnal chart at the hand, you start with the moon. So two candidates, we will look their chart today, are diurnal birth people. They have the sun above the horizon. If the sun is below the horizon, then this is a nocturnal chart. If the chart is above the horizon, then this is a diurnal chart, day chart, namely. So if you look at the Purdaria periods, we see that Donald Trump is in period of South Node. Actually, South Node is a malefic traditionally. North Node is benefic, South Node is malefic. South Node is more related with loss or to leave something, to release. If we check the chart with that Purdaria period ruler South Node is placed in the fourth house, angular, and with the moon. Actually, moon is weakened in conjunction with that South Node, but now we are looking for South Node's period. So we have to, first we think that, yes, it is not good for a person who is a candidate for presidential election because the South Node indicates loss. But the only thing is not that. Also, we have to check the aspects of the South Node and the ruler of the South Node.
So Oner,
yes.
Just one moment. If you can go back to the previous slide.
Yes.
I want to make sure people understand.
Mm-hmm.
So before you explain, the Chaldean order of the different planets, and so the Firdaria means that each planet determines a particular time in the life of the individual.
Yeah, that's actually, sorry, this is the part of Time Lord system in traditional astrology. What is Time Lord? Time Lord is generally a planet, or it can be nodes, one of the nodes as well, that rules a specific amount of time of the native. I mean, the events in his life.
Okay.
So these are the Time Lords, actually. And Purdaria and Perfection are Time Lords. They are the most important part of continuous astrology. None of our days are not ruled by any of the planets or any of the symbols in this chart. So these are the Time Lords. Thank you for clearing.
Basically, he started his life when he was born in 46 with the sun period. Yes. And then there are sub-periods, Sun, Venus, Sun, Mercury, Sun, Moon, until the Venus period, and then the Mercury period, and then the Moon period. Yeah. And you start with the Sun because he's a diurnal chart?
Yes.
Is that the reason? So right now, basically, in 2019, on his birthday in 2019, he started a South Node period that will continue until his birthday in 2021. And that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, actually in Purdarias, there are main rulers and there are sub-rulers. For example, main ruler is the sun for the first 10 years of the native's life. And there are sub-rulers, they are changing every 1.4, 1.5 years. And sub-period rulers are important, but the most important one, the main period rulers. For the nodes, they are not subdivided. They don't have partners, but the others have their partners. For the nodes, since they are not ruling the houses or the signs, we just look at their placement in the chart, house placement. And the next thing we have to do, their rulers. But if we are looking for the planets, the first thing we have to do to see their placement in the houses and then their rulership of the other houses. So for the South node, we will just check the placement in the natal chart, which is the fourth house, and sextile from Jupiter.
And just one other note, sorry to interrupt you. Going back to the previous slide, we see that in 2016, he started the North Node period. So he won the election the first time with the North Node period.
Yeah, he won the election because the North Node was in conjunction with the Sun. Of course, the North Node means profit, to gain. And it is advantage to have North Node in the 10th house. And the ruler of it, Mercury, is not afflicted in this chart, and occidental of the Sun, which is good for Mercury, and in conjunction with Alhena, which we will see a bit later, is one of the most important fixed star indicating for a leader who is probably marching one. And the Sun, of course, is not afflicted by any of the malefic planets as well. And for the rulership of the South Node, Jupiter sextiles to it, and Mars trines to it, and the Sun opposed to it. And its ruler, Jupiter, is placed in the second house, but very close to the third house, which I will count him tonight in the third house. Now, since I don't have much time, I will go forward to perfection technique. Perfection technique is one of the oldest traditional astrology techniques. Actually, it is coming from Manilius's time from the first, second centuries. And there are many different perfection techniques that are coming from Hellenistic period. But tonight, I will use the one which I perfect house cusp for every year. Perfections can be done with the planets. Every year you can direct the planet, or you can advance the planet one sign, and one sign. Or according to some astrologers, we direct the planets or the ascendant houses, not only the signs. Actually, if you look at the background of the system perfections, normally they were done by the signs. They did not perfect, the older astrologers, they did not perfect the planets and the ascendant by houses. They did it by signs. But some later astrologers, which one of them is Robert Zoller, he was using the perfections with the house cusp, and he was using Archivetus houses, and I will use Placidus houses tonight. So in the first day of our lives, we are in the first house. So when we were born, we are not 1 year of age, we are 0 years of age. When we completed our first year, then we skip one house to the second house when we complete 1 year. So every 12th year, we come to the ascendant and the first house. And when we multiply it, 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, and 72 comes to the first house for perfected ascendant, which indicates the native's conditions, the conditions and atmosphere around him, what will happen to him. So we can see for every year and every month and every day. So on 72 years of age, Donald Trump was in the first house, and for 73, he was in the second, and for 74, as he is in now, he is in the profected third house, profected ascendant, came to the third house. So communication, travel, and siblings are related with the third house, as we all know very well. And Jupiter is very close to that house, so he will be lucky in that year. He will have a chance to win the election. And year lord, as we call the perfected ascendance ruler, year lord Venus, placed in the 11th house, one of the luckiest house, actually the luckiest house in a chart, a succeeding house, which gives Venus to get more good results. Year Lord is the most important one, actually. Among the other predictive techniques and Time Lord system, I care the perfection technique at most, and Year Lord is the most important planet for the native for that year he is in. So a benefic house, the 11th house, but in conjunction with Saturn, which gives him some problem, and Venus is afflicted by Saturn. And squares to Jupiter. Actually, normally Jupiter squares Venus is not so benefic. It doesn't seem so benefic, but we are talking about benefic planets, and they have mutual reception with each other. And so he will take some support, but not in the beginning of the year, after the months of the year, because first of all, he will have some problems since Venus is in conjunction with Saturn and square with that Jupiter. But then, since he has mutual reception between this Venus and Jupiter, because Jupiter placed in Libra, which Venus rules, and Venus is in Cancer, which is exaltation of Jupiter. So there is mutual reception. That means they are supporting each other, but not at the beginning, in the later days or months of the year. And Venus is the ruler of the MC as well, and in conjunction with Procyon, one of the big stars.
So, Oner, we have just a few more minutes.
Okay.
If
so,
just to give you.
So yeah, I'm continuing that. But one of the most important thing I have to show for this year, if we use derived houses beginning from the third, when we come to 10th, we see Leo on the cusp of the 10th house. Why am I looking for the 10th house? Because this is important for his career and success. So derived 10th house cusp is Leo. So for this year, perfected MC ruler is the Sun, which is placed very powerfully in this chart, as we have seen. Gives him success. For Joe Biden, he is in Sun, Mercury, Purgaria period. And in Biden's chart, these are falling in the 12th house, which is a weak house. Mercury is afflicted because he is combust. And he is before the Sun, Oriental, which is not good for Mercury. Mercury is very close to Mars and afflicted by this way. So it gives him not strength, but it weakens. And the Sun also afflicted in the 12th house, which does not give him more strength than Trump's. And for the perfection, since perfected ascendant comes to the 6th house, which is one of the cadent houses, actually, related with health matters and services, etc., placed in the 12th house, again, is not that powerful. And perfected MC. If you look at to perfected MC, we come to the 12th house as well. He has many planets in this house, including the Sun, which is good for him. And I don't think that I don't have much time to talk about month ruler and day ruler. Am I right?
Yes, but what I want to highlight is that Oner has provided many more details in his articles, so you can complete some of the missing points by reading his article. But I want you to feel comfortable closing when you feel that you've covered the most essential parts.
Okay, so uh, for the election day, if you look at the transits these parties having, of course, first thing we have to check the year lord and propected MC lord that are for Donald Trump, Mercury, and the Sun. Sun has North Node transit and he has nodal conjunction, which gives him more strength to win the election. That is important. And the year lord Venus is afflicted by triple conjunction from Capricorn. But at the end, if we look at the month lord, which is Saturn, and then day lord on the exact day after calculating, which is Mercury in conjunction with Alhena and Uranus sextiles to that planet. I think he will make a second surprise because he's a man of surprises. He has the Sun Uranus conjunction. For the last time, he was in competition with Hillary Clinton, and most of the people were thinking that Hillary would win, but it didn't happen so. I think he will make a second surprise because most of the people, again, if I know very well, thinking that Joe Biden will get it. But according to my gesture, it will be Donald Trump for the second time. I think I filled my time. Am I right? Or
Thank
should
you.
I?
Thank you, Oner.
Yeah. Actually, I have also Biden's chart, but it will take more time. So,
and again, you will, it's a very extensive exercise. There's so much, when we analyze these events, there's so much to explore. But it is in your article, so people will be able to get, in a couple of days, all the details.
Yeah, and last words. When we compare the natal charts, Trump's is more powerful. When we compare the transits with the time lords, again, it is the Donald Trump. So my guess is Donald Trump will win for the second time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oner.
Thank you.
And
so I will stop my share.
I just want to share quickly the perfection wheel. Oner was speaking about each year representing a particular house. So you will have this wheel in the article. So 0 to 1, a year of age is the first house. 1 to second year is the second house, and so forth. So Donald Trump now is at the third house. It's not listed here because he's 74. Yeah. So he's a third house perfection, whereas Biden is a 74, 5, 76, and he's a sixth house perfection.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. So thank you, Oner, and let's now introduce Deborah Houlding, who is the founder of the STA School of Traditional Astrology and the principal of STA Horary course. She is also the originator of the Skyscript Astrology website, the past editor of the Traditional Astrology magazine, and the author of The Houses Temple of the Sky by Wessex Publications. Welcome, Deborah.
Hello. Nice to be
all
here.
Yours.
Oh, right. Okay, well, let me first of all share my screen and get my slideshow running. So it's quite good that Oner gave some introduction to the two natal charts, which I'll be briefly touching on too. I'm just going to move a control panel out of my site, but in a different way. So what I'm going to be looking at is a technique called the use of accession charts. This is a technique that is strongly used in Arabian astrology, and to be honest, I've not seen many astrologers really make any use of it since the Arabian period. However, I've been looking at these charts. I think they're very interesting, and my presentation is going to look at how Arabian astrologers would use these charts and what they would say about Donald Trump as president and potentially Joe Biden if he took over the control in this year. So an accession chart uses an ingress chart. So everybody knows, most of you will know about the importance of an ingress chart for in mundane astrology. You know, it's one of the most important mundane charts that we look at to look at the political scene for the year. But not many people would realize that these were the charts that Arabian astrologers would use to represent the chart of the ruler. And it wasn't just for the year that they took rulership of the country. The ingress chart for the year that they acceded to power was considered to be like a birth chart for their reign. So the ingress year chart for that year would be representative of the length of their reign, the effect of the reign, the style of the reign, and the legacy that they left, and also, you know, how long they reigned as well. So I need to give a little bit of background on this and do a little historical detour, because it explains why I have an interest in this chart and where the information is found. So in 2015, I gave quite a lengthy and in-depth presentation for the AFA in Arizona about the elector's chart of Baghdad. And most of you, you know, many of you will have already looked at this chart. It's a hugely important historical election. You know, and there's always been a bit of a mystery of why they had the best astrologers in the world, and yet there were clearly some issues about this chart that didn't seem to make sense. So the puzzle for me was to really understand the logic of this elected chart. And anybody that knows anything about election astrology will know that when you're electing the moment to commence an important project, you don't look ahead for the best day in the year. What you do is any radical election, any important election will always be rooted into the natal chart of the person that is responsible for the thing that is happening. So it's an extremely important principle in election astrology, made through all the historical sources. You know, the principle is something like we find in Ptolemy's Centiloquium: the election shall advantage when it is constituted from the nativity. Otherwise, even though the election be well made, it will not profit. What we need to do, what we're looking to do, is find the moment that extends and perfects the promise that is seeded in the natal chart. Now, what we know about the foundation of Baghdad was the city was built on the orders of Al-Mansur. So obviously what I wanted to find was Al-Mansur's natal chart so that I could see what was happening in his birth chart that was built into this foundation chart for Baghdad and extended from it. However, astrologers of that era did not keep records of the natal charts for their rulers. What they kept instead was this record of the accession chart. So Al-Mansur, the reason why he wanted this new city was because his dynasty, the Abbasids, had just taken control of the Arabian Empire from the previous dynasty. Their capital city was in Damascus. He wanted to found a completely brand new capital and design a city that in every way would represent his ideals and his power as a leader. He personally chose the site of the city. He ordered its design. He was involved in the design of the city. And we can see from the pictures here, Baghdad was originally built as a perfectly round city. In the elements of its symbolism are absolutely loaded with astrological relations, bringing the sky down to the earth, even to the division of the quarters and, you know, where the military posts were held. They connected with the use of terms and faces, but it was very much recreating the heavens on the earth, and it was done on his order. One of the reasons why he wanted it round, because he wanted his golden palace in the middle to represent him as the king. and he wanted all sections of the round city to be equidistant to him, just as the planets are in the sky. So we now have a birth chart for Al-Mansur. What we have is contained in the work of Mashallah. And the main source of this kind of technique is the Astrological History of Mashallah by E.S. Kennedy and David Pingree, which was published in 1971. Within that book, there is an appendix which really gives this treatise of the knowledge of the accession of the caliphs and the knowledge of the accession of every king. So what this treatise explains is that the accession chart is the ingress chart. It's the ingress chart because the reasoning is based on the absolute supremacy of the sun as the significator for kings, caliphs, or principal rulers. So when you have a change in the king, then this astrological attention is brought to the moment the sun changes or renews its cycle in the zodiac. So the ingress chart is representing that. And within this, you see, even on the first page, this reference to the importance of the sun. Know that the sun is the regent of the stars. All the planets are attached to the sun, as are subjects to their rulers. The sun is the indicator in the matter of kings. The sun among them is like a monarch in the middle of his kingdom. So this treatise explains how the ingress chart, and the moment that the sun, makes its ingress into Aries, that moment in the year that a new king arises is seeded as a nativity. It's different from the birth chart because the birth chart represents the whole of the life and all aspects of the personality, whereas the accession chart only cares about the legacy as a ruler. So it's like a birth chart for somebody in power. So once I had this information and I put together the accession chart of Al-Mansur, which again is just the ingress chart for the year that he took reign, then we start to see, it's vital to have this information to understand the foundation of Baghdad. So what we see here is we find that his main significator is Saturn in Capricorn. And he's described as somebody who's tall and lean, bony, with a dark complexion, with a sparse beard. All these things are typically Saturn in Capricorn details of signification. We're told that he had a very simple life and he was really quite tight-fisted. And yet, he was also very generous to the arts. He had a renowned love for philosophy, astrology, the arts and poetry. So we see a strong theme with the moon in Sagittarius, the midheaven in Sagittarius, and the midheaven ruler. The midheaven would represent the pinnacle of his expression as a king. And it's very beneficially placed in conjunction with Venus in his accession chart. And when you bring that over to the foundation of Baghdad, what you start to realize is some of the details. There's so much in this chart that I'm not going to go into because it's out of scope. But you start to open up the logic of what was going on with this elected chart, which brought out the promise in Al-Mansur's nativity. Also with that sun, which was on the degree of Regulus, which was, in around 10 degrees Leo at that time, 9 degrees Leo, I think it was. And, if you overlay the city plan, if you overlay this chart to the original city plan, then what would happen with that sun is it falls directly in orientation with the golden gate that led to the golden palace that sat in the middle of the city, like a monarch in the middle of his city. So this was, a really fascinating piece of research that I got into at the time. And what I found was that not only was it vital to understanding the election, that this accession chart really characterized all aspects that we were able to, to know about today, about Al-Mansur's life, about his mannerisms, about the details of his life, and even within Mashahad's text, he calculates the length of life within that. And then if you even look at it more and you put the transits to that moment, because we have a date of birth, the accession chart continued to have vital transits, very dramatic. And what I did in my original research in this is to continue it through so that every time something really dramatic happened to the history of Baghdad, this chart, which was the accession chart of its founding father, was triggered by, important aspects and transits as well. So this really drew me into, you know, a big interest in, you know, these accession charts. They really seem to work. I did a lot of looking at the other Arabian rulers, and this all took place in 2015, which was the year when Donald Trump, you know, announced his intention to stand for presidency of the US presidency. So my interest then was, well, okay, well, we know, given the fact that we, you know, the 22nd Amendment of the US Constitution will not allow Obama to stand for a third term, we know that if this Arabian technique works, that we already know what the accession chart of the new ruler is going to be. It's going to be the ingress chart for Washington for 2016. Now, this chart, that's a fundamental principle of astrology. No chart stands alone. If it's relevant, then it will continue a theme in the, you know, the person that fits to it. There will be a mesh, just as there is with the elected chart for Baghdad with the ruler that founded it. Charts are radical when they are rooted, and they also draw to them the people that express them. So originally I looked at this chart with, you know, very early, and considered the charts of Clinton, Donald Trump, and Bernie Sanders. And then Bernie Sanders dropped out. But it's not necessary for me to look at Clinton's and Sanders' chart. We don't have time for that. But it was also very obvious that only one of these three candidates had a nativity that mirrored the theme of the accession chart. So this is the accession chart, the ingress chart for 2016, which demonstrates the accession of the ruler that takes power in that year. This is the nativity of Donald Trump. It's very obvious, you know, even at a quick glance, that there's similarities in the theme. And both of these charts are very highly charged. They have very combustible symbolism. They both have the moon in a fire sign. So in the accession chart, the moon is in Leo. In Trump's chart, it's in Sagittarius. And they're both translating, they're carrying forward the influence of a volatile Uranus as their most recent aspect. So in the accession chart, the moon is separating from the trine of Uranus, and it's then applying towards the square of Mars. It will change signs, but it's within orb, and traditionally astrologers would consider that as next applying aspect. So it's moving between a very volatile Uranus in a fire sign, applying to fiery Mars. And we see the similar thing in Trump's nativity. He has the moon in Sagittarius, again in a fire sign, separating from its last contact is an opposition to Uranus, and it's applying towards the opposition of the sun. So another hot, dry planet. So fire, combustion is really strong as a theme in this chart. Mars is powerfully angular on the ascendant of both these charts. And we see this personalized, you know, in Oner has already said, you know, it's something that we see. You see somebody who's known as being orange, you know, his hair, his skin tone, you know, depictions of him as a hothead are, you know, quite striking in their incendiary symbolism that's attached to Donald Trump. Now, in a natal chart, remember, this is representing Donald Trump, the person. This chart is representing Donald Trump, the king, or the leader of the nation. But in a natal chart, you know, when we have Mars rising, we tend to apply to that, you know, indications. This person they're full of confidence, you know, they're assertive. Mars in a fire sign, high intuition, impulsiveness, headstrong willfulness, strong spirit, courage, combativeness, and also, according to William Lilly, when Mars rises on the ascendant in a fire sign, it gives a very ruddy complexion. But when we look at a mundane chart, which is a political chart, we tend to see a different kind of theme in the traditional text. So Mars rising on the ascendant, the theme that you see repeated is a theme of disturbance, division, civil unrest, protest strikes, industrial disputes, riots, arson, inflamed debates, controversial policies, military interventions, or over-reliance on force to impose social order. So in a mundane chart, it's not good to have Mars rising on the ascendant. The first house in a mundane chart tends to represent the country as a whole and the people, you know, the nation and the populace and the will of the people. Although in this use of the technique, it's different, because as the accession chart for Trump, this is more personal to what Trump brings as a leader. Right, now, of course, other elements of Trump's chart, nativity and his own nativity, they show a lot of popularity. So, for example, the fact that Venus is the midheaven ruler and it's in sextile to the midheaven, this shows, you know, a natal promise of somebody that does very well in his career. You've also, as well as that, you've got Mars conjunct Regulus, which is the kingmaker on the ascendant, and this Eastern emphasis shows so much, you know, self-confidence and self-belief, and, you know, a regal assumption of his own importance. So this, you know, as a birth chart, it tends to show somebody who's likely to expect to rise in status and to want to impose their will on a surrounding crowd. Okay, so I hope other people can see as well as I can that there is a very clear continuation of theme, or a shared emblem within these two charts, which is why it was immediately apparent to me back in 2016, only one person of those three candidates had a chart that seemed to be the person that would fulfill the promise of this accession chart. So I always felt quite clear that Donald Trump would get the election in 2016, but it worried me, you know, the signification that was brought to it. Now, if we look at this, how does it represent Trump as a ruler? Well, it's a polarizing theme. It's got a lot of fiery energy, and that tends to, you know, indicate a lot of contention, frustration, social unrest. The things we would look at are, we would look at the first house, and that's got the two malefic planets, naturally malefic planets, Mars and Saturn, rising within it. We would look at the ascendant ruler, Jupiter. Jupiter's on the midheaven. Jupiter is retrograde. It's separating from the trine of Pluto, and it's applying by retrograde motion to the square of Saturn. We've got the moon in the 9th house, and the moon is separating, as I've said, from the trine of Uranus, and again it's applying to the square of Mars in the 1st house. And we would also consider the fact that the sun is in the 4th house, and the sun is separating from an opposition of Jupiter as its last planetary contact, and again the sun applies to Mars. So this fiery theme is really being built up. Now, the fact that Jupiter is on the midheaven and that Jupiter is the ascendant ruler, which is the main significator for Trump in his presidency, well, Jupiter on the midheaven, this shows us he's going to want to step up, he's going to want to take ultimate control and authority, he's going to want to take command, and he's also going to want to be very visible and open. You know, he's not holding cards up his sleeves, he's very intuitive. As it comes to him, he will make his decision, and you know, the public gets to know about it before anybody else. So it's an indication of a very visible, engaged with the public leader. Now, Jupiter, we know it as a naturally benefic planet because Jupiter does not have the instinct to limit or to destroy. It's naturally expansive. It's driven towards attaining greater growth and augmentation. That's what Jupiter is about. But we have to consider that this Jupiter is debilitated in Virgo. It's in its sign of detriment, and it's suffering retrograde motion. And it's applying to the square of Saturn. And Saturn in the 1st house, Saturn is a planet which does delight in limitation and restraint. So this application of Jupiter to Saturn, which is very close, look at the, you know, the degree and the minutes involved, it's the closest aspect in the chart. And it's a very important aspect because not only is Jupiter applying to Saturn, but Jupiter is the dispositor of Saturn. Saturn is in Jupiter's sign. So this is an indication, in traditional astrology, we call it pushing of virtue. Jupiter imposes its will on Saturn. It uses Saturn as the way to get what it wants. So, you know, I see a signature of here of this is the way to make astrology, make America great again, which is very much a Jupiterian theme, but it's being brought about by the imposition of control. So as an example of how that can play out, think about the heightened emphasis on international affairs that we have shown by the moon in the 9th house. But how do those international affairs play out? They play out by concerns about immigration, the building of walls, strengthening of borders, crackdown on, originally when Trump started his presidency, there was a lot of controversy. He banned the Muslims from entering the country. So this use of Saturn is involved in the Jupiterian theme. And so I put here that Trump's significator characterizes his mannerisms, his style of government as strongly Jupiterian, but not purely Jupiterian. And the reason why I say that is because Jupiter is debilitated. And when a planet is debilitated, the traits that it brings are corrupted. They turn towards a caricature of what they should be. So anybody familiar with the works of William Lilly will know that when he talks about what Jupiter represents in signification, there's certain features when Jupiter is dignified or well placed that it represents, but when Jupiter is badly placed or in its sign of detriment, then this is the kind of thing we expect. William Lilly tells us it represents somebody who's wasteful and careless, could be ignorant, desperate for attention and flattery, yet unappreciative of friendships, lacking in wisdom, and presenting a false or a hypocritical concern for religious matters. So those are the things that William Lilly tells us we should expect when Jupiter is debilitated. These are all faults that center around the perversion of qualities that we would normally expect Jupiter to enhance. So they're brought forward, but they're brought forward with some kind of fault. Okay, so what we see from Trump is that he's a larger-than-life but somewhat flawed Jupiterian character. In terms of, is he an effective leader? Well, for that, we would look at the ruler of the 10th house, and we would note that Mercury is the 10th house ruler, but Mercury, again, is in debilitation. It's in its sign of detriment and fall. And there's a mutual reception between these two planets, but they're separating, so that's not a helpful thing either. What these two planets together combine to really define Trump's style of government, and the way that he orates, because Mercury is also the way that he communicates to people. Mercury in Pisces, it kind of describes the way that Trump expresses himself. It's imaginative, it's undisciplined. There's some simplicity there. It's also all a little bit unpredictable. So, a quote here, typical Trump, everybody that knows he said, some things that take your brains all over the place. If you're a conservative Republican, if I were a liberal, if I run as a liberal, they would say I'm one of the smartest people around anywhere in the world. It's true. You just never know what you're going to get. There's this style of government which is not particularly disciplined. Okay, so gone backwards instead of forwards. Right, so Mars on the ascendant, obviously he's either rambunctious or divisive if you're a critic, or he's daring and he's brave and he's audacious if you're one of his supporters. The things to note about this chart are the strong emphasis on the moon in the 9th house. International relations are key to his presidency. And, when we look at the moon, again, we will consider that it's translating between Uranus, which is quite unconventional, applying to the square of Mars. He will use bluff, he will use the threat of force, but we also consider that the 9th house is ruled by the sun, and the sun applies to the trine of Mars. So this gives strength to, what Trump can do with his bluff and his threats internationally. So, I've said his approach to international affairs can seem innovative and aggressive, shocking even, but potentially successful as a way to strengthen the nation's autonomy whilst developing unimagined relations with leaders previously considered too hostile to entertain. And then with the prominent Mars on the ascendant, we're in the 5th house, you would also consider, there could be controversy here. Controversy with things concerning the children, education, birth control. So issues to do with pro-life issues, appointment of controversial ministers that take care of education or pro-life issues, decisions on when to open school. All these things would be areas that are likely to generate a lot of heat. And then the final thing that I would like to look at for Trump is the fact that the planet, although we know that Jupiter applies to Saturn, the next planet that applies to Jupiter is Venus. And that shows the issues that are brought to him, because Jupiter, where that moves to, that shows where Trump wants to go. But the planet that applies to him shows things that are brought to him that he has to face and deal with, whether he wants them or not. So I think it's quite relevant that Venus rules the 6th house, and, you know, Venus, the 6th house is the house of illness. So, you know, it rules the 6th house. And Venus is not a well-placed planet in this chart, because before it gets to Jupiter, it first passes over Neptune and it squares Saturn. So, you know, I think there's some reflections there on the fact that COVID came as part of his term. Okay, so very quickly, I don't know, how am I doing for time? Have I got 5 minutes?
Just 5 minutes.
5 minutes, make it quick. So here's the thing about accession charts. They're not expected to predict the ruler. They're expected to be looked at when a new ruler ascends. So historically, you know, that was when somebody died. So the question is this the accession chart of Biden? Because if Biden doesn't win the election, this chart is not an accession chart. It just remains the ingress chart for 2020. However, what I noticed when I put Biden's chart together with this is that, again, we have this really lovely continuation and shared theme. So here we have the accession chart of, hypothetically the accession chart of Biden. This is 2020 ingress chart for Washington. This is Joe Biden's accession chart. And we can see we've got a completely different theme. So whereas Trump's chart was choleric, marked by fire, instability, volatility, the energy in these two charts are both very cold and dark. The theme is melancholic, which is earthy, cold and dry, or phlegmatic, which is cold and moist. And there's an emphasis on fixity that leans towards preservation and conservation. So both charts highlight Scorpio. We've got Scorpio rising in the ingress chart. And if you notice, that falls within the area of the stellium of planets in Biden's nativity. So, you know, this indicates, this is a cold sign. It indicates emotive drives and political passions that are consciously controlled with tactful reserve, precise aim, and careful deliberation. There's a strong emphasis on Saturn in both charts. Biden has Saturn angular on the descendant. The accession chart has most of the planets disposed by Saturn, including the moon. And I think that Saturn-Venus opposition is very powerful in Biden's nativity as well, because I know that he's had a great deal of, you know, life issues too, that have been very upsetting, like the loss of his children and his wife at a young age. But Saturn is strong, and there's a theme of cold control and reserve. Both charts are marked by obscurity in the planetary placements. So in Joe Biden's birth chart, most of the planetary activity are in the houses that we call dark houses. So the 12th house is very strongly emphasized. In the ingress chart, all of the planets are underneath the horizon. So the theme here is, you know, this shows activity beneath the radar. So this would characterize a presidency where national policies are less willingly exposed. And for that reason, if Biden takes the presidency, he's likely to suffer from a lack of trust from the public, who feel that he's not engaging with them and being open with them. The main significator, as if we assume that he ascends to power, and this becomes the theme of his presidency, his main significator is Mars. Now, Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and traditionally that denotes self-assurance, composure, and, you know, a steady nerve. It's the signature of a strategist. But the placement of Mars in the 2nd house, where it conjoins Jupiter, which is the 2nd house ruler, and Jupiter is in fall and conjunct Pluto, this suggests that there will be, that his focus will be on financial matters. But it's not a good indication for the financial state of America during his presidency, because the 2nd ruler, Jupiter, is in its sign of force. So that suggests that there will be a downturn in the economy, which could simply be the result of the coronavirus effect rather than Biden's handling of it, but still it shows an area where he will suffer. He's likely to be somebody that introduces increased taxation or cuts in public spending. The chart as a whole is far more political rather than, you know, Biden's persona. There's an absence of planets. He won't want to engage with the public. I think I'm on my last slide now. Maurice, just in case you're getting very nervous.
No, that's fine.
So, Biden would be a very strong policymaker. He wouldn't be likely to be considered a popular leader. His chart, like Trump's chart, has a 10th ruler that is, debilitated, and it's signified by Mercury in fall in Pisces. And I think Biden has admitted he's not a good public speaker. He has this stutter, which you see in his birth chart, which Saturn in Gemini. But again, it's like this, both charts don't give the impression of a president that really leaves a legacy as a great president in the eyes of the world after their reign is finished. I think that the ways that he will struggle will be, we look at Mercury's applying sextile to Uranus on the 6th house cusp. Again, this is indicating problems to do with public health diseases. And what is noticeable, again, with this chart is that Venus, which is in the 6th house, comes towards Mars. Now, as the 6th house ruler, this again brings problems with the need to deal with public health issues. But the other element of this chart that I think is worth mentioning, although I know I can do it only quickly, is that this seems to me to be a very, key planet in indicating that Kamala Harris will have a strong role in his presidency. And the reason I say that is that Kamala has has her own natal Venus at 18 degrees Virgo, which is right on the midheaven of Biden's birth chart. And her natal Jupiter is at 24 degrees Taurus, which is on the descendant, right on the very degree of the descendant of this chart. So there's lots of ways in which Harris is shown as being somebody that's quite instrumental in this chart. And the fact that Venus is applying by trine, I think, enlivens, and she would probably be seen as the face that is more engaged with the public. Okay, so I think...
Thank you, Deborah. Just a couple of questions. You spoke about Kamala. Is there a specific way to identify a vice president in the...
Well, yes, she would be shown as his partner. You would look, if you were looking for that, she would be 7th house, which is Venus, obviously. And that's why I'm seeing Venus as reflecting on her. And also the fact that in her own natal chart, she has Jupiter right on the 24 Taurus, and her own natal Venus is bang on the degree of Biden's, natal midheaven. So she's coming across, I put here that public health issues are obviously important, but my analysis is that this relates to Harris.
And is there any way to track the length of the reign? How long?
Here's the thing. This was the main issue that the Arabian astrologers did. And when you read that text that I indicated at the start, that is the main focus of it. However, the techniques that were used for that were very different from what can apply. So, they were expecting it was expected to be like a division of a 50 or 60 year reign. The techniques that are characterized don't apply into something that can only last 12 years. However, I have to say that if we did look at it purely as in the way that they did, there would be features of Trump's accession chart that would show that he had a long reign, that his reign was not cut short. But I don't have any reliance in those timing methods applied in this way. I'd also like to say, Maurice, if I may, that to me, I really like the continuation of the theme as something that could show why Biden takes up this becomes the person that represents what is happening in the country at that moment. But I don't personally have a strong belief that I feel that this election will be very close. And I think that when they are very close, I have a real issue with, can astrologers predict it without taking out the view that people have freedom of will? I don't practice astrology that the prediction comes through following a trajectory to see where it lands. And when that trajectory is clear, you can make a clear prediction. But wherever there's freedom of will, as an astrologer who is predictive, I predict what will happen given a certain situation. I don't predict what my querent will do in that situation, having got my advice. Can we predict what the electorate will do if they've got free will to make that choice?
Okay, fair enough. So just to make it clear to everyone, the 2020 accession chart is only applicable if there is a new ruler.
Yes. It was
And
never used as a way to judge who, there is no historical precedent for somebody saying, doing what I've done. But I've not seen a lot of use of this chart since the Arabian period. And what I like is the fact that it continues. I think if Biden wins the election, I think the astrology will be very nice. If he doesn't, I won't give up on astrology.
So if Trump wins, we go back to the 2016.
We continue the 2016 Ingress chart is Trump's succession chart until he ceases to rule.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very informative and a new perspective, which is not very new.
It's not very new. But it's been drawn, it's been a long time since it's been pulled out of the bag.
Wonderful. So we'll proceed with Kenneth Miller. Thank you for joining us. Deborah, if you can unshare your screen.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
So Kenneth is going to speak about the Chaitra Shukla Pratipada chart, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing this very accurately. Kenneth, BA in Anthropology, Psychology, Religious Study from the University of Colorado, MA in Eastern and Western Traditions, the History, Philosophy, and Transmission of Astrology from Kepler College. He's currently serving as president of the Kepler College and is on board of ESAR. Awarded Jyotish Meda Shri from the organization ICAS, Jyotish Kovid from Council of Vedic Astrology, and level 1 and 2 certification from American College of Vedic Astrology. Kenneth is based in San Diego and maintains a practice as a consulting astrologer. He's the author of Mars, Passion of Strife, The Confounding Influence of Culture on Astrology, and the forthcoming new translation on the Bright Fixed Stars by Anand, not to be confused by Current Cures, of 379 with Andrea Gertz. In addition to Indian astrology, his background includes Hellenistic, medieval, and modern psychological astrologies. He's been in practice for 15 years. Cheers, hello, and welcome. The stage is yours. And I don't know if you see that, but it seems like the screen is flashing.
I'm not seeing a flashing, but are you seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just make sure nothing's impinging on it. Can I move this a little bit here and a little this here? Okay. So first of all, fantastic. I apologize for being late, but I heard most of it and quite good. My job's going to be, frankly, quite easier. I just have to teach you guys Indian or Vedic astrology in 20 minutes. So let's get to it. I'm going to give you an overview of what Indian astrologers, so Jyotish is what we call Vedic astrology or Indian astrology. And to do a complete mundane analysis, these are the things that would be taken into account. Some are more important than others, and here's the list of them. And then we're going to deep dive on what we'll abbreviate as CSP chart, Chaitra Shukla Pratipada chart. And I'll talk about that thing because we only have 20 minutes. All right. So like our Western brethren, if there is a chart of the nation and it's known, you obviously want to look at that when doing mundane predictions. Then there's this Hindu New Year chart, or what I'm going to call the CSP chart for short. And I'll explain that in a minute because that's what most of the talk is going to be about. You would then also cast oh yeah, by the way, Indian astrology uses the sidereal zodiac. So all my references to the zodiac are sidereal. And if I reference the tropical, I'll throw the word tropical in front. So just between you and me, we got that straight. So you would also look at the sidereal solar ingress charts for the year, and you would look at lunar charts of new and full moon. Of course, we also pay attention to eclipses like Western astrologers do. No one or very few people actually do this, but there's a very rich literature of interpreting comets and dialing them in to what's going to befall the country over the course of the year. And they're not always bad. Sometimes they're a good omen. It depends where they appear in the sky. It depends on their shape. And we have all this descriptive literature that trains us. But since astrologers don't really look at the sky anymore, we certainly miss the short comments. But this is more for when you hear on the news, oh, there's a comet and it's going to be visible for like 6 weeks. So that's something that one historically would dial into their mundane work. A newer technique is solar return charts that I think prior to the 20th century wasn't done widely, if it was done at all. But now when you train to do this stuff, they have you do that. So there's an Indian version of a solar return chart called Varshafal. And of course, we look at transits, and then they have these different geometric patterns that take the lunar mansions and the signs and arrange them a certain way. And you do all this kind of esoteric manipulation of transit positions to get information out. And that would have been a cool thing to focus on. But again, we'll stick with the CSP chart. And then, of course, if you know the leader's birth charts, as Deborah has shown, and Oner, that can be very important. Another thing that Indian astrologers like to use is the political party chart. And they do this in India because they know, they're a new nation. They were formed, after World War II when British gave them independence. So they actually, and because astrology is dialed into the country of India, they know they have the foundation information. There are charts for their parties. And so predictions can be made on the rise and fall of their fortunes based on those charts. I believe we have the Republican Party. I think there is a time for the founding of the Republican Party. I don't think we have one for the Democrats. I might have that mixed up, but in any event, but that's something they would do. And then they would also look at oath-taking ceremonies, or what we would call inaugurations, more to get an idea of what the reign of that president or prime minister is going to be. Not so much. I've seen Western astrologers that like match the chart of the candidates to the inauguration to see like who has a better day. From the Indian point of view, that wouldn't really make sense. It's more like it's the start of their reign, and so whoever makes it there, it's going to kind of describe what befalls whatever leader is going to be running the country. And I believe I'm representing the thing. So we're going to look at two charts. We're going to look at the chart of the USA, and we're going to look at the Hindu New Year chart. And the chart that most American Jyotishis use is called the Kelleher chart. James Kelleher, longtime Vedic astrologer. He was paid to research this and spent a lot of time rectifying the chart. And he came up with a 6:30 p.m. time. And like I say, many Jyotishis use this chart. Interestingly, it is pretty close to the Regulus USA chart, which is another chart where an intense amount of time was spent rectifying, if you're familiar with the big thick book on the Regulus chart of the USA. But so this is the chart I'm going to be using. Now, this is a sidereal chart. I've put it in a wheel so that you can follow my conversation when we get to the delineation section in a minute. But I've actually printed it out in Indian form, because that's my mind works faster looking at that. So I'll be looking down when we actually talk about the charts. But I just wanted to sort of familiarize yourself. For simplicity, I just put in the traditional 9 planets that Indian astrology uses, which are the 7 planets plus Rahu, the north node, and Ketu, the south node. Some Jyotishis would put outer planets in, but just to make this exercise simple, I've taken a very traditional approach. Okay, so what is this chart that we're going to be looking at? The CSP chart is also called the Hindu New chart, and it's very similar to what Deborah was talking about, except it is calculated for the moment of the new moon in sidereal Pisces. So the sun and moon are always going to be conjunct in this chart. And you set it, of course, for the capital of the country, in our case, Washington, D.C., and it is one of the things that's going to tell you what's going to befall the country. You're going to interpret it as, how's the country going to do this year? What are going to be the challenges and things like that? But it's really simple. So, I mean, if you want to play with this, all you need to do is find out the moment to change your software into the sidereal zodiac of your choice, and then set it for the new moon in sidereal Pisces, and you get the chart. And we're going to be looking at the 2021. But before we do, there's something else that's done with this chart. The first thing is you want to find out who, like, the king, which planet is the king of the year. And this is determined by the day of the week that that new moon falls on. So as you all know, it's our days of the week are associated with planets, right? Saturn is Saturn, Saturday is Saturn day, Sunday, etc. So whatever day that falls on, that planet's going to take on significant meaning for the chart. And then, and I'll answer your questions in a second, as the sun ingresses into sidereal Aries and other signs, sidereal signs, it creates these like ministers that are in charge of other things, like agriculture and water, and you can get like weather predictions from this. So you do all this ahead of time, you'd find out who all the players were, and then you'd go back to your New Year chart. Now, someone said, why Pisces? Unfortunately, many things in Indian astrology just come down to us as, this is what you do. And maybe there is an answer to your question, but I don't know it, except that the new year has traditionally been celebrated on the sidereal new moon. So in their minds, culturally, it's the new moon, it's the beginning of the new year, it sets the tone. Just like for us, it makes sense to do an Aries ingress chart because that's the beginning of spring, and it is a new year because it marks the seasons in the northern hemisphere, and it would be the first day of fall in the southern hemisphere. And it's like, well, why that? Why not one of the other ones? Because, you know, we're culturally conditioned to think of that as the beginning. Plus, we put Aries there. So for them, they've just always that's just always been the new year. Okay, I think that's the only question. All right, so we're just going to be paying attention to the king and looking at the chart and hopefully ending on time because I respect people's time. So here we go. Here is the CSP chart for 2020 set on March 24th, which was when, look at this, the sun, oops, I'm 1 minute off. Oh, how did that slip by me? Okay, well, almost the exact instant of the new moon. Actually, it's 1 minute past the new moon. And we get Aquarius rising for this chart. Now, the day of the week that this happened on was what we would call Tuesday, but it was Tuesday before sunrise. See, sun's still down here. And so in Indian astrology, like some Western, like our planetary hour system, the day starts at sunrise. So it was still Monday because the Tuesday's not at, Mars isn't going to actually activate until the sun comes up. So this was Monday night to Tuesday morning. So now the moon is going to be the king of the year. And the textbooks say that the moon in the second house, of course, the sun's always going to be with it. They're always going to be together because it's a new moon chart. But being in the second house, that's actually considered pretty auspicious and things are going well. And I remember when I first read this, I'm like, wow, the classics really need to be updated. But then you see that it is afflicted by a couple of things. So in the aspects in Indian astrology are different than in Western astrology. And I'll just leave it at that. Trust me, they're different. But Saturn here is actually aspecting the moon. It makes like a forward sextile. It's also in the 12th house. It's Lord of the 12th house. And the moon rules the 6th house. I just thought it was interesting that we let this pandemic get out of control in this country. And we weren't able to get on top of it. You know, Saturn is slow moving, and it causes delays, right? These are just keywords, you know, stock keywords here. But what we're, I think, going to get the real juice is by looking at the two charts together. Okay, so here we go. So here we have the Kelleher chart of the US and the CSP chart. So I am not a professional mundane astrology. I'm a consulting astrologer. And so I will try to satisfy Sharon K, who likes us to make predictions. I'll make a prediction based on this chart. But it is, we're just looking at one of all those elements. And also, this isn't my forte. My forte is teaching and presenting and doing normal astrology for clients. But that said, so my attitude to this was, I wanted to see if the chart of the new year for the US indicated any kind of regime change or disruption. Did it favor the status quo, or did it indicate that things might shift? So now you might fault me for taking that attitude, or maybe that's not the right approach, but that is what is going to inform my, thank you for the compliment. That is what is going to inform my analysis here. So looking at this chart, we've got Aquarius rising barely, and it's, you could say, oh, that's a fixed sign. Doesn't that mean that things aren't going to change? And yeah, it could be that. It's certainly a tick in that box. But the fact that the ruler is in the 12th, that's not a great position. That's actually a position for, I'm going to retreat from the world, although it's hard to imagine that the current regime would ever do that. But it is more, you know, it's not a prominent position. Whereas when we look at the opposition, you know, which is interesting, you know, American democracy is based on our ability to tolerate a political party that we don't like being in power for a certain amount of time. But we know that that will only be a certain amount of time, and eventually things will change. And that's at least one of the explanations as to, you know, how we've been able to maintain this as long as we can. Now, some people have argued we may be in the last days of that. I'm not here to present those arguments, but it is interesting that we live in a time where it's not, it used to be, I mean, when I was a kid, it used to be that the two parties disagreed on we all agreed there was a problem. Oh, poverty is a problem. But then the liberals had a solution and the conservatives had a solution. Now we don't even agree on the problems. In fact, the worldview is like split into two very different realities that people are experiencing. And it's very bizarre here. And I'm not sure how that impacts the astrology or how astrology impacts that, but maybe we'll see. Let's, you know, you can join in. Now you're like junior Indian astrologers. So, okay, opposition is going to be the sun, and the sun's in the second house. That's going to be better. And there's a rule in Indian astrology that when the lord of the house a planet is in is somewhat close by, that planet really likes being there. And so Jupiter is close in the what we call the friend zone here, so that the sun and the moon, for that matter, enjoy being there. So just with, you know, not going deep at all, it's making me think that there may be a change, so that Biden may have a chance, or if he doesn't survive to the inauguration, you know, Kamala becomes president. But now you might say, well, wait a minute, Saturn's in dignity and Mars is exalted. And yes, but again, because they're in the 12th house, I mean, he's not going away like he's going to disappear. If Trump does lose the election, it's not like he's going to disappear. It's not like he's going to disappear. He's still going to be like a public figure. He's probably still going to be divisive, and who knows what will happen, especially if it's a narrow victory. Who knows? You know, that we could see a lot of fight there. However, I do think that Jupiter being in the 11th. And by the way, I'm using whole sign houses because that's what we do in Indian astrology. And these being the second, to me, favors a change. Now, when we look at the chart of the USA, and I think I'm almost out of time, so I'll wrap this up. I mean, there's a lot more we could say, but my goal was really to lead you to be able to play with this chart in your own way. With Sagittarius, sidereal Sag rising for the USA chart, the ruler of us is Jupiter, and Jupiter is at the very, very, very end of sidereal Sag at the time of this chart. And there's a rule in Indian astrology that when you're in the last degree, it's very destabilizing. So I took this as another indication that the current regime was going to be destabilized and there would be regime change, for lack of a better word, that we would get a new president. So based on my approach and analysis of this, I think it's likely that Biden will win. But that could be modified if we looked at both the charts of the candidates and we pulled in all that stuff. And for all I know, tomorrow they're going to, see a new comet, and that may change things. So I'm not hedging my bets. I mean, this isn't my forte, so I don't, whether I'm right or wrong, that doesn't mean anything. It's a 50-50. At the end, it's a 50-50 guess. So you can be right when you're wrong, kind of thing. But more of this sort of philosophical stuff will be in my article if it made it past the editor. But in any event, hopefully that's given you a taste of an Indian approach to these matters. And that was really my goal. So I think my time is up.
Thank you, Ken. And yeah, I mean, it is bringing your points about the 50-50. It's very interesting because Oner, presented a very compelling case for Trump, and yet, we see with the accession chart and with this chart that, it's not as clear cut. And we see that there, the election is probably very close, that there's something about the climate and what's happening that really brings a lot of strength to both camp in one way or another, because astrology doesn't always describe things. If we see Kamala Harris very powerful, is she powerful because she wins the election, or is she powerful because she just gained visibility and she already has status and an improvement in her development?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that makes this far in the process is obviously very prominent, and they're going to go on to do prominent things, whether that's run the country or something else.
Exactly.
And the thing we don't have in America is we really don't have a chart of the demos, of the democracy, of the people, unless that's the birth chart of the United States. But again, there's so many competing ones. We have a unreliable birth time with that. And the other
Can I
thing
make a comment, because I found it quite interesting when Kenneth said you made a comment something like, if he lives to which made me smile, because not in an ironic sense, in looking at the accession chart, there were a few times when I thought, is he going to die in office? And she takes
and just to be clear, for the NSA monitors, I wasn't basing that on any astrology. I'm just basing it on his age. I mean, either one of them could drop for any reason, for due to health reasons. So that's the only reason why I mentioned that, because he is old. And
I can't remember exactly the detail now, but there was things in the accession chart when I was looking at it, I was thinking, I don't know that I want to say this, but it has crossed my mind a few times whether that was indicated. So yeah, okay.
Another thing too with the if I just one last comment, the 2000 election, actually we've had several elections now where the popular vote candidate did not win because of this weird system we have. And there's talk of changing that system, but of course it hasn't happened yet. And also, normally we would look at the transits on election day, but that's gotten muddled because several states are now allowing you to vote weeks. It's like some have already opened up their polls. So I think a couple of states are allowing their citizens to vote by mail now. So there, so that adds a whole nother element to all this.
Absolutely.
Not that I'm trying to create Hail Marys for mundane astrologers, but it's
May I
a
add
tough job, people.
quick thing that, as I looked at the charts, what I noticed over and over were the transits, not only for the days of the election, but the days of the electoral college, the time of the inauguration, were, from a traditional astrology point of view, all loaded with very erratic, unstable, divisive symbolism, which made me feel that this has got to be a close event to have that much. You also made a point about America is so polarized, and I do feel that there's a heat in the air, that people are either for Trump, against Trump, but Trump seems to be the center of the emotion, and that, and the fact that there's just all this instability around the pivotal dates with the transits. But maybe you're going to cover that, Maurice, because I know you're looking at more. That makes me think, I don't, this could go anywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if it was hung completely and it had to go to the electoral college, but for one reason or other, it doesn't look a good situation.
Well, let's...
Not a happy populace, if I may say that.
Yeah, it looks like that. So thank you both, and we'll proceed with our last installment, Mr. Maurice. Thank you, everyone, and I'm glad to be presenting this last approach, which is probably the one that many people use more frequently, the transits. I don't know if you're familiar with solar arcs. Ken, I'll just grab the screen from you, sharing. So just briefly about my work. Oops. As you know, I've been involved with OPA for quite a long time and continuing to serve as vice president, part of the board. And I'm gonna, a lot of you addressed the 12th house, and I did a lot of research on the 12th house, including, using the modern correlation of Neptune and the sign of Pisces. And to me, the 12th house is actually a very powerful house for political office. And in most of the leaders will have Sun or Saturn, which are the two main planets representing leadership in the 12th house. Trump has Leo in the 12th house and his Sun on the North Node. Biden has Sun in the 12th house. Bush Jr. had Sun and Saturn in the 12th house. So the 12th house is the last house of that last quadrant. So if you're interested in this, in this new perspective, you can check out my book on the topic. Now, looking at the transits, the interesting thing is that we are at a very, very interesting year, which is a year of a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. And that's the time that this conjunction is exact in Washington, D.C., 1:20 p.m. So it's right there in the 10th house. It's angular to the ascendant at 0 degrees Taurus. So we see that this Jupiter-Saturn is screaming, something's gonna happen here. It's also, as you may know already, Jupiter-Saturn meet every 20 years, and it's usually in the sign of the same element. So for about 200 years, they meet in the same element. So it was in Earth signs up to now. Last time in the year 2000 in Taurus. So we're now starting a cycle of Jupiter-Saturn in air sign. And Jupiter-Saturn, if we look at the mythology, Jupiter defeats Saturn, takes over, and represents new structure, new leadership, new systems. So in the background, before we look at the actual day of the elections and the inauguration charts, just knowing that this is happening right between the election and the inauguration, and the clear message, at least if we just focus on that, is that there is a shift of party and a shift of leaders. Because that's the nature of this conjunction. And it happens in Washington to be in the 10th house, and it's angular, square, the ascendant. Just, looking at that gives us a feeling that there is change in the air. It happens to also happen on the actual solstice day. So the sun is 0 Capricorn, semi-sextile, and root dispositor of the sun is that Saturn-Jupiter. So we see how even the sun in Capricorn, is immediately influenced by that. Now, the other critical thing is that this conjunction happens at 0 Aquarius, which is the day the degree that the sun will be on the inauguration. Inauguration day happens on January 20th, when the sun is 0 Aquarius. So the sun will actually be on the conjunction degree, which also means to me there's, a shift happening, an activation. The sun will activate the conjunction on January 20th. Now, as we said, we look at things from different angles, and they each tells you a different story, which is a bit confusing. If you want to be an astrologer who wants to make firm assessment. So here is, just a moment, my commands don't respond. Here are some statistical references to previous Jupiter-Saturn cycles. So in the 1920, the conjunction was in Virgo, and Warren Harding, a Republican, wins following 2 terms by a Democrat. So we see a shift of leader, a shift of party. And this was before the 2-term limit. So, it wasn't, he could have won, the other guy could have won a 3rd term. 1960, John F. Kennedy wins, again, changing party and bringing a new leader, a Democrat, following 2-term Republicans. In 1980, a new cycle in air, Ronald Reagan wins the election and defeats Carter after 1 term. So we see that Carter was defeated, and we see that the first hint of the new cycle of Jupiter-Saturn in air signs, even not allowing Carter to have 2 terms as the previous elections. So a major change. And then in 2000, George W. Bush wins following Bill Clinton, again, a shift of Republican following a Democratic lead. Now, there are 2 exceptions, one in 1900, and that was a year prior to the Jupiter-Saturn election. So, they're not 20 years square, there's roughly 20 years. So that year, the conjunction was actually in 1901. It was in Capricorn, and William McKinley, a Republican, wins a 2nd term. So there's no change of leader and there's no change of party. But he is assassinated a year later, right on the eve of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So right there, we see there was a shift of leadership on the year of the Jupiter-Saturn. And McKinley was also born. So he had that aspect natally, a Jupiter-Saturn, not a tight conjunction, but he was born around a conjunction with Saturn in Capricorn and Jupiter in Aquarius. And another exception is when Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt won a 3rd term in 1940. This was wartime, so a very unusual circumstances. And he's the only president, I think, who ended up winning a 4th term. And right after that, that's when they changed the policy to only have 2-term presidents. So Franklin Roosevelt died a year after his 4th term in 1945. But he did win the 3rd term during a Jupiter-Saturn rule. But the exception here is that he's born again with the exact Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus himself. So it was a Jupiter-Saturn return for him. So the odds of defeating that were exceptional. So this just gives us a background. Now let's look at the charts. Another important event happening right in the zone of the election is the total solar eclipse at 23 degrees Sagittarius. So that degree becomes also very potent, very important. And let's see how that plays out in the charts of the leader. Interestingly, the ascendant for Washington for the eclipse is 29 Aquarius, which is exactly opposite Trump's chart. And we see, that Trump has a lunar return, as we will soon notice. Now, another thing that we need to pay attention to before, I will get to the actual chart, a few things about the day of the elections. Mercury is turning direct on the day of the election, 25 degrees Libra, squaring the Pluto-Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. So this speaks of a shift, especially because there's so much Gemini energy. Trump, is a Gemini. Kamala is a Gemini moon, Gemini rising. Biden has an MC in Virgo. Mike Pence is a Gemini. So Mercury is a very important significator in this election. And the fact that it turns direct speaks, number one, of potential issues, logistical issues with voting counts and, the process, the logistical procedures, but also with the candidates themselves. The other thing is that on the day of the election, Mars is about to go direct. It's 15 degrees Aries. I'm going to look at the charts later. Mars is at 15 degrees Aries retrograde, and it's opposing the United States Saturn at 14 degrees. It's 14 degrees cardinal. So 14 degrees Libra. Let me look at the chart so I can show it to you. So you see Mars retrograde opposing Saturn and square the Sun, which to me shows not just that people are not happy, but there's heat and volatility and, it's a climate, it's a hostile climate. It's a climate of, things are not clear. Things are not very smooth. The other thing is during the whole day, the moon is in Gemini and the moon squares Neptune in the course of the day. So the beginning of the voting, the moon is around 11 Geminis, and towards the closing of the polls, the moon is around 21 Gemini. And so in that course, it's going to be on the North Node, it's going to be on the Mars of the United States, and it's going to square Neptune, which can lead again to confusion, problems with discrepancies and fraud, and something that may not go very smoothly. Saturn, by transit, is on the Pluto of the United States. It's going to be a third and last pass. which also, Saturn on Pluto has brought a lot of controversy in the course of the pandemic and the protests, and tremendous doubt in the existing system, conspiracy theories exploding because Saturn Pluto brings this suspicion of corruption and fear that a lot is happening under the surface and is not being revealed, this lack of transparency. So these are important markers as we look into the candidates. I do think that even though the climate of the election time is very unstable, the fact that Venus, the ruler of the MC, is in the 10th house and is approaching Saturn means that there will be a resolution, that things will kind of settle, the dust will settle, soon after. But still, even though it conjuncts Saturn, it's going to still oppose Mars. So let's wait and see. Back to our slides. Just making sure everything here is clear. So this is the chart of the solar eclipse. This is Donald Trump. And when, I wanted to share that when Donald Trump won in 2016, I looked immediately at 2020, and I saw this exact nodal return with the moon of the day right over his north node, 10th house, sun. And to me, it became very clear that he's going to be a 2 terms president. Like, this is super compelling. It gives him tremendous power. The ruler, Mercury, is again turning direct. It's squaring his Saturn and the transiting Saturn. So it's caught between the 2 Saturns, the natal and the transiting one, which often, Saturn, we tend to think of Neptune as fraud and confusion, but Saturn has a lot to do with ethics in my book. Jupiter, Saturn, ethics, but Saturn in particular has to do with doing the right thing, going by the law, enforcing the law. And when Saturn is involved, there's often a controversy about what's the right thing. Is it okay to count it this way, or is it okay to count it that way? There can be a lot of debates about what's the righteous thing to do. So if there are any controversies about the logistical process, the square to Saturn can show that there are ethical debates being raised. So even though, he has this strong moon and strong nodal return that really guarantees pretty much a victory, that Mercury is funky. And, the aspect it's making is also very precarious. However, it's moving into his 3rd house, which, as Oner depicted, is the house of his perfection. Now, when I looked at this, I didn't know who the Democratic candidate is going to be. And I knew that if anyone stands any chance to win against Trump, they need something very powerful around the early 20 degrees Gemini. And the initial thought was Bernie Sanders has Jupiter around 20 Gemini. So the same node's moon would be on his Jupiter, which can offset the advantage that Trump has. But he dropped out. And so I looked at, Mike Pence, also a Gemini, has a very similar signature and similar activation. And Venus is about to be on his north node. Now I use a Cancer moon. We don't have a time for Pence, so he's either a Gemini moon or a Cancer moon. But I think you would all agree that Pence is more of a Cancer moon guy, more conservative. I think he calls his wife mommy. So there's something about the Cancer moon that shows a more conservative approach. Now we look at Joe Biden, and Joe Biden doesn't have anything around 20 Gemini. He has Saturn and Uranus early Gemini, but he doesn't have anything prominent around the 20 degrees mutable. He has an MC at 20, 19, 20 Virgo, which can be, you know, somewhat of a significator. So here came, you know, the new player in town in August. Kamala Harris was designed as the vice president to run. And look, her ascendant is 24 Gemini, her North Node is 24 Gemini. And so we look at her transit, that whole thing lands on an angle for her, which will be very powerful as well. She's born on an exact full moon, 27 Aries, 27 Libra, with Mercury turning direct on her sun, transiting Sun in her 5th house. The 5th house has to do with performance, with taking the stage. So this, you know, gives us a hint that she's actually boosting Biden's presence in this election. Saturn is squaring her full moon quite tightly in the 8th house, which also goes back to telling me there may be some controversy in the 8th house. You know, what is happening? Are we uncovering something that's under the surface? Now, I'm going to use solar arcs because, you know, just for the sake of brevity. Solar arc is a technique that advances all the natal planets roughly 1 degree per year. So technically, all the planets will move according to the speed of the progressed sun. So if the sun moves roughly 1 degree per day, we move the sun 1 degree per year. But it's not always precise. Sometimes it's a little less than a day. Sometimes it's a little faster than a degree. But an average of 1 degree per day. So we move the whole chart at the pace of the progressed sun. So the whole chart moves roughly 1 degree per day. So Kamala is born in 1964. So she is 56 years old, 56 or 66 years old, right? No, 56 years old. And we're going to progress that to her, see what her solar arc is showing. And we see that her natal full moon, so the whole structure of the chart moves 1 degree per year. And we see that that exact natal full moon lands on her ascendant on the day of the election or the period of the election, because this is not day specific. You know, this is already happening now. You know, she's already within orb of having that full moon on her ascendant, and it's only approaching, it's going to approach the exact degree of her ascendant and then the exact degree of her nodes. So she has basically a de facto eclipse. You know, she has a lunar eclipse because it's a full moon on her nodes, which can have the effect of definitely boosting her sun-moon presence. And especially with the moon on the ascendant, the female presence being highlighted. Now, we also see that the transiting, the solar arc nodes. So we see activation on the natal nodes, but then we see the solar arc nodes tightly conjunct her Mars in Leo, which tells me I'm competitive and I'm going to win this. So we see very strong character. So we, first of all, this shows this lady's on fire now. She's engaged, and she's going to bite, you know, to get what she wants. Does that guarantee a victory? I wouldn't say it would be enough on its own, but because we see the other activation, it definitely adds to her presence. So what is Mars ruling? Mars is ruling her 11th house. It's ruling the solar arc Saturn and Moon. And if you use traditional leadership, it also rules her 6th house. So important activations. Solar arc Mars is also entering her 5th house, which is related to stage, performance, leadership. So we see Kamala is definitely bringing Biden, you know, what he didn't have, as astrologically, but also politically. So let's look at Biden. First of all, let's look at Donald Trump's solar arcs. So once again, we move everything per year, and we see that Donald Trump will have Uranus close to the ascendant. Now remember, it's 1 year per degree. So Uranus is approaching, his ascendant is 2958 and Uranus is 2903. So it's going to be exact, you know, 6 months later-ish. But it's still pretty close, and we can consider that angular. Uranus is very important because, you know, he's born with the sun Uranus on his north node, so it's a very important planet for him. And it brings an element of unpredictability. So Trump has trump cards for sure. The one thing that questions his victory would be that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happens on the cusp of his 6th house. So it's not a prominent house, not for leadership. And it's also a house, you know, Jupiter and Saturn are going to move into his 6th house, are going to oppose his Pluto. This signals health issues. So we see that he's entering a phase of his life where he may not be in top shape, whether he wins or not. We see that health issues are going to intensify very likely in the next, 2021 and 2022, because Jupiter, Saturn really set the tone for where the focus is going to be in this next cycle. And for him, you know, it's either a desk job, 6th house, or dealing with health matters, or it can be, you know, some kind of political service. Aquarius in the 6th house can bring that sense of really, you know, doing something to support a larger cause. Now, if you use whole sign, then it happens in his 7th house, which can give strength to the opponent. So Biden, what's going on with Biden? Biden transits they're not screaming anything. However, you see there's one thing that brings a lot of focus. First of all, like I said, personally, I would see the fact that Biden has 4 planets in the 12th as the very description of someone who is holding public service. People who have 12th house emphasis are people who lead impersonal lives, who can be successful in public office. However, they may struggle on a personal level. So it's a last quadrant house, which has to do with public issues, with global issues. So people who have a strong emphasis in a 4th quadrant and the 12th house, not only the 10th, are going to be people who are involved with fame, public office, public service, and they are instruments of the masses. So they, in a very 12th house way, they don't own their own lives. The public owns their lives. It's a house of sacrifice. It's a house of, you need to see the larger perspective. You need to transcend your ego, which are all needs related to public service. So having the sun and focus there shows that he was relatively successful in public office, successful vice president, senator, but his personal life, was marred with grief, losses, and very scorpionic events and tragedies. So on the day of the election, the sun enters the 12th house on his Mars. And for him, Mars is important because it is a secondary ruler to the Scorpio stellium. The other thing is that Neptune is angular, touches the 4th house. And again, Neptune has to do with a larger cause, something that's beyond your ego, something that requires a level of self-sacrifice. So you're sacrificing your personal life because there is a larger call. Now, referring back to Oner and his use of fixed stars, his north node is conjunct Regulus as well. So his north node conjuncts Trump's ascendant. And interestingly, we see that his inauguration speech, acceptance of nomination, shows that Biden had the sun very close to his north node on that Regulus degree. So we see a new moon for the acceptance speech. If we reverse the charts, both acceptance speech have Taurus rising and Sun and Uranus on the ascendant. If we look at Trump's acceptance speech, both, again, Saturn on the MC, Uranus on the ascendant, a moon-sun trine. So with Biden, it was a new moon, and with Trump, it's a trine, with moon on the south node in Capricorn, which lands in his 5th house. Interestingly, Venus here is opposing that cluster of Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, which can show tremendous tension with his personal dealings, especially since Venus rules his MC. It's a very important factor. Now, the other interesting thing, Biden, looking at the solar arc for Biden, we see that Saturn by solar arc is coming to that degree, and Chiron is right here. For some reason, it's not in this chart. So Saturn is right on the Chiron north node, a year off to the exact north node, but on Regulus. And the solar arc MC is on his Saturn line, Saturn axis. which shows in my evolutionary approach, Saturn does show, authority and becoming the one who is the ruler of the legislation and the who represents the law and represents the leader, the authority. So it's an important activation. Now, other interesting activation, we look at midpoints for a solar arc because we look at the precision degree. It's 1 degree per year. So each degree becomes extremely important. And the solar arc directed Jupiter at 14 Libra is right on his Sun North Node and Venus North Node degree. So the midpoint between the North Node and the Sun Venus is that 14 Libra, which is again giving him strong presence and an activation of leadership in his 10th house. The Sun directed, the solar arc Sun is on his Moon Sun midpoint, which is an important factor of his presence, of his notoriety and leadership. So to sum it up, Biden on his own would not have a compelling winning argument. I mean, he has strong points, but Trump, has superior winning points if we just compare the candidates. But if we bring Kamala in and Pence in, Kamala brings a very, very strong support to the activation of leadership that then reinforces Biden. Now, another fascinating alignment is when we look at the composite chart of Biden and Kamala, their Sun is 12 Scorpio, which is going to be the solar return of the election. So on the election day, they have a birthday. They have a solar return. And on inauguration day, they have a lunar return at 29 Aries. The inauguration chart shows a Sun at 0 Aquarius and a Moon at 29 Aries. So they have the solar return on the election day and the lunar return on the inauguration day, along with Saturn on the nodes. And then I talked about Biden's Jupiter being in the early Gemini degrees, being a strong indicator. And here, their composite has that Jupiter activation. So where Trump has his Sun, they have their Jupiter. So what does that mean? I mean, on the one hand, we see Trump feeling confident. And on the other hand, we see Kamala and Biden also feeling confident. My sense is that the night will be very young. By the time everything is being counted on the evening of November 3rd, we probably will not have definite results by then. And it may last a few days until we really see, who is the winner. And that can cause a lot of noise and anguish and reactive behavior. So it may appear to both that they're winning when in fact there's no decisive argument yet. So this is pure speculation. As we say, astrologers see the signs, but they're not going to know. We're not God, and we don't know exactly how these planets are going to manifest. But I do hope this gives us at least an understanding of what's going on so we can understand the climate and, of course, test our own theories as and as we're going to go through the motions of this process. So this, this completes my my analysis. I will perhaps share one last thing, is the inauguration chart. Which is very interesting. It's a Sun-Uranus exact conjunction, square Jupiter. The moon, depending on exactly the time, it's usually noon. The moon is void of course at 29 Aries, but it's the moon return of Kamala and it's the moon return of Biden. Kamala has a 27 Aries moon, Biden has a 0 Taurus moon. So even though the moon is void of course, it is a moon that is in favor of the Biden camp. And this very puzzling Mars-Uranus square, which again shows us things are quite intense. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, all speakers. Thanks for attending, and I will just have a closing prayer to all of us for the United States and for the whole world. May we see winning and rising the deserving president and the one who will lead the nation and will lead the world forward into an era of well-being, progress, security, and international connections. So whoever is the winner may be the one that will lead this country to a fruitful Pluto return. Blessings for everyone.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.